Umar ibn Abdul-Aziz, it's good to know about him. He was one of the most pious of the predecessors. So it's good to know the seerah of our ummah and kind of take the lessons from him. He was the tabi'een and one of the most knowledgeable of the tabi'een. His father was Abdul-Aziz ibn Marwan ibn al-Hakam ibn al-As ibn Umayyah from Quraysh. That's on his father's side. And from his mother's side, he was from the offspring of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. So Umar's son had Asim, and his daughter was the mother of Umar ibn Abdul-Aziz. And I don't know if you know the story, but Umar, when he was the Khilafah, the second Khalifa after Abu Bakr radiallahu anhuma, he used to patrol the streets to check on his nation in the ummah, if they had any needs that he wasn't fulfilling. So one time as he was going through the streets, he heard a mother telling her daughter to put some water in the milk, to adulterate the milk, basically to water it down so you can make more money when you sell the milk. And she said, the Khalifa Umar ibn Aziz has forbidden us from doing that. And she said that she said the Khalifa Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu has forbidden us from doing that. And the daughter said to her mother, well, after explaining that it's haram basically, or he said we're not supposed to do that, she said, Umar is not around to see you. She said, what about the Lord of Umar, Allah Azza wa Jal? Can't he see us? So Umar radiallahu anhu, he heard this statement from her and he wanted to marry his son Asim. He said, this is such and such girl, go marry her, because she knew how pious she was. And from their offspring was this righteous Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul-Aziz. He was also known as Ashaj bin Umayyah, like the one who was scarred or like fractured basically. When he was a young man, he used to go into the stables, and admire the horses. So one day he was there and the horse hit him in the head and cut his head open. It was bleeding. And his father, came and was wiping the blood. And he said, in kunta the Ashaj Bani Umayyah fa innaka la-sa'id. If you are the Ashaj, the scarred one from Bani Umayyah, you are verily going to be of the happy ones. Because it was reported that Umar ibn Khattab used to have some dreams about someone from his offspring that will fill the earth with justice after it has been filled with injustice, and he will have like a scar on his face or on his head. And the father, remembering this narration, this dream that Umar saw, he said this might be his son, right? And it turns out, most scholars say that was the fulfillment of Umar ibn Khattab's dreams. When he was a young boy, he was known to love seeking knowledge. His uncle or grand-uncle, I guess you could say, from his mother's side was Abdullah ibn Umar, one of the great scholars of the Sahaba. And he used to admire him so much and always loved to attend his lectures, and he aspired to be someone like that. He was known to love the Quran and memorize the Quran from a young age, and he was very serious. But being from the family of Bani Umayyah, he was very well off. Like his uncle is the Khalifa, his cousins are Khulafa and Umara. He had very much wealth. Like they said that he would wear a different thobe every day. He'd wear the best. He'd have the best odor, scents like misk. He would, take care of himself basically. But he was also serious and had high piety at the same time. Like he feared Allah Azza wa Jal, and he had a very strong inclination for scholarship and seeking ilm, knowledge. One of the narrations says that when he was sent to study with, at those times the parents would send their children to have like a mu'addab, a person that teaches us their children adab, manners, good manners. So he sent him to Salih ibn Kaysan, rahimahullah, to learn and to have adab from them. So it's reported that one day when he was late to one of the salawat, and the Imam Salih ibn Kaysan asked him, what made you come late to the salat? And he said, my maidservant was brushing my hair or combing my hair, right? So he had his head shaved, That's how he said that combing your hair is going to delay you for salat, and he shaved his head. But imagine, the respect they had for the scholars at that time. If you're like you're from the royal family, your uncle is the Khalifa of the ummah, your father is the governor of Egypt for 20 years, all your family members are like the richest and the most powerful people. But when it comes to ilm and knowledge and adab, the scholar takes precedence. He shaved the Umar ibn Aziz's head to teach him adab. Like salat comes first before anything, just for being late for salat. This is the respect they had for the ulama. It's said that he studied under 33 of the greatest scholars in Tabi'een in Medina, and he became the governor of Medina. And he ruled Medina for some time, but even as governor, he still sat in the majalis of ilm, like he sought knowledge. And in his shura, he took 10 of the great scholars to make them their people that they took advice from, to learn from, right? So he always surrounded himself with knowledge. And because he was so serious and stern in following the deen, his uncle had him, one of his other uncles that became Khilafah, removed him from the governorship of Medina. And as he was going out of Medina, he started crying, saying, like, I hope I'm not from the ones that Medina has expelled. Because there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that Medina expels al-khabath, like it kicks out the bad stuff. So look at how pious this Imam was, like he was scared to be under that hadith. Later on he came to marry Fatima bint Abdul Malik, and she's one of the famous, or most famous women in the history of Islam, actually, because of her position. Even amongst the history of non-Muslims, and Allah knows best, they made a poem for her, Bint al-Khalifati wal-Khalifatu jidduha Ukht al-Khalaifi wal-Khalifatu zawjuha. So she's like the daughter of the Khalifa, and her grandfather was the Khalifa, and 3 of her brothers were Khulafa, and her husband was the Khalifa. So some scholars say that she was the only one that attained that position. And even the lessons we can learn from her life are amazing too, along with Umar ibn al-Aziz. So she was one of his wives and closest advisors, and one of the most famous of the wives, and a mother to his children, and kind of like a minister, an official minister. So together they were very, very pious, mashallah. Both of them, they were used to living the life of luxury and having everything, but once he became the Khalifa, he left all of that. It said when he got the news that he will become the Khalifa, he passed out, he fainted, because of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his goal was to return the right of every Muslim, that had been done injustice to. So he basically gave up most of his wealth. A lot of people, when they become leaders or kings or rulers, they start getting more wealth. In his case, in his wife's case, it was the opposite. He started getting rid of his wealth so he won't be held to account for it. And he started taking the wealth from the Bani Umayyah that they had accumulated during their rulership and returning it back to the people. There's many narrations about his piety and reading the Quran and crying and basically passing out from the verses of punishment and stuff like that, because he took it to heart so dearly. He was asked, why after he became the Khalifa he was found sitting under a tree crying, and they asked, what's wrong, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, or what's wrong, the Khalifa? And he said that, I remember the poor person who might be hungry right now under my ruling. I remember the scholar who might be oppressed. I remember the sick person that might not be taken care of. How will I face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment? So once he became the Khalifa, he took the whole ummah as his responsibility. And he felt the need for not to have one poor person to complain about him on the Day of Judgment, or one scholar to be seen oppressed under his administration. One time he wanted some grapes to eat, and he had to go to his wife and ask, can I borrow a dirham so I can buy some grapes? And she said, you're the Khalifa of the Muslim Ummah and you don't have money to buy grapes. And he said, I fear that the fire will be taking those unlawful possessions, So he was had so much taqwa that he didn't even allow himself some of the basic necessities. And there's many stories of how he was so humble with his servants. For example, he had a servant girl that was it was very hot, and she was fanning, and the heat overtook her, and when she awoke she found him fanning her. The Khalifa of the Muslim Ummah is fanning a poor little girl. basically. And she was so embarrassed, and he was like, the same heat that was bothering me, bothered you, and you have a right as well as, as anyone else to have the coolness upon you. That's his humbleness. He served his own servants. And he used to do chores by himself, and it was known that he was one of the most eloquent of speakers. كان من فصحاء العرب. Yet he would speak very little out of fear of his words being taking him to account. Nowadays we find many people, mashallah, they don't have the fasaha, and they speak and speak and speak and speak, and they don't care about what they say. But this Imam, not only was he the Khalifa, but he was a scholar. It was known by Imam Malik, Imam Zuhri, all the great scholars of Islam respected him as an Imam, not just as a Khalifa, but as an Imam, a faqih, mujtahid, right? And yet he was very scared to speak without knowledge. One time he was asked by his cousin, he had so much work to do and he couldn't do it in that one day, so the cousin said, why don't you just wait till tomorrow? And he said, I have so much work today, how can I wait till tomorrow? And what is guaranteed for tomorrow when I will be asked in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my responsibilities? So the lesson of not procrastinating. When he was on his deathbed, some narrations say that he fell ill from being so scared of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like praying the night prayer and having the Quran affect his heart so much that he became physically ill, from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But another narration says that he was poisoned by one of his servants, because the Banu Umayyah, this narration says that he was so harsh with them, basically trying to retrieve the rights of the people, and they started kind of getting on their nerves, for the hardship that he's trying to place on them. So they sent someone to poison him, and he asked the boy, why did you poison me? And he said, for 1,000 dinars and my freedom. So he said, give me the 1,000 dinars, and he returned it to the Bayt al-Mal, the Muslim treasury, and he said, go to a place where no other person will see you, get out of here. He could have had him killed and executed, of course, but his mercy and his knowledge, he was more worried about facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and letting this person, get out of there. And his deathbed, they came to him, he said that he didn't have nothing left to give to his family because he spent all his wealth in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of his family members came and said, I will give you 100,000 dinars to take care of your family with. And he said, go take that money and put it back in the treasury of the Muslims, where you got it from. And he said, then who will take care of your kids? What are you going to leave for them? You're not going to leave them nothing. He had 14 sons only. I don't know how many daughters, but he had a lot of children, mashallah. He said, who will take care of them? He said, إِنَّ وَلِيَ اللَّهُ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْكِتَابِ وَهُوَ يَتَوَلَّى الصَّالِحِينَ. My protector is Allah, the one that revealed the book, and He will take care of the salihin, the pious people. Right? He said, my children are of two types. They're the pious person. In that case, they will fall under this ayah, and Allah will take care of them. Or they are an evil person, and I'm not going to help give them money to spread their evil. Right? Even in the last moments of his life, he's thinking about the akhirah, his offspring. Right? Most of the rich people or the umara or the leaders, from the day the child is born, they're giving them thousands and thousands of dollars. And worried about dunya, dunya, dunya. But Umar ibn Abdul-Aziz was worried about the akhirah, facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the questioning he will have about his wealth. He died at the age of roughly 38 or 39 years old, and he was a Khalifa for only 3 years, but said in those 3 years he basically ended poverty, established justice, and spread knowledge all over the ummah of Islam. Right? In just 3 years, how much he changed the ummah. So it's possible when people fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and get close to Him that they can make big changes, even in a short time. And many of the scholars came to his funeral, and many scholars wrote poems about him and praised him highly. So it's one of the, I thought, appropriate people from our history that we should know a little bit about, and go back and maybe study about some of these great imams that we read about all the time. And even about his wife, there's many stories about her too and her piety. Basically, when they became the leaders, they took that to their hearts and saw it as a burden and responsibility, not a time to live it up. So they became more pious and closer to Allah and more fearful, right? And they left. It's harder when you come from luxury and you live the life of luxury all your life to go to like a life of poverty and hardship. But they did it fi sabilillah, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. They did it to correct the ummah. They did it so that Allah can save the ummah and not send down His punishment. So these are the true leaders of Islam, and these are the ones that we try to emulate and follow and get close to.